You'll be coming on regularly to help anchor all of the election and all of the caucuses and all of the primaries, and to really help guide us through what it is going on, because we don't want our viewers to have to go to any other network to hear what's going on in the election. We want you to get everything you need from Fox Soul.
Well, I think this is such a great opportunity for, one, you and I to work together, which I love, but two, to educate voters, because you would be amazed at how many people ask me questions that, you know, really reflect that they're not tuning in, that they're not paying attention. And this is a very, very critical election, and we need everybody paying attention and tuning in. So this is great.
I totally agree with it, and I think that we have an opportunity tonight, because tonight is the first time the votes are being cast. You know, all the talk is coming to an end, and tonight in Iowa,
of all places.
And, you know, Areva said that because just 4% of Iowa's population is black. So of all places, you know, the Democrats, once again, and the Republicans, incidentally, make their way back to white Iowa.
And, you know, Iowa has a lot of significance. You're right about the demographics, but people always ask, why is Iowa so important? Why does a potential presidential, you know, nominee need to win Iowa? And the real answer is momentum. Because if you can come out of Iowa and then you go right into New Hampshire, the big four, Iowa, New Hampshire, South Carolina, Nevada, whoever wins those four early primaries has a tremendous amount of momentum going into Super Tuesday, which is March 3rd, and there are 14 states that hold their elections on Super Tuesday, including big states like California. So Iowa is really important. And New York, So even though Iowa is tiny, and I have to give Iowa a shout out. I'm from St. Louis, Missouri, so Iowa is a neighboring Midwestern state. So it's getting a lot of grief, particularly from a lot of Democrats who are clamoring, saying, why do we keep starting the Democratic primary, particularly given that African Americans are so critical to the, you know, the democratic process, particularly, you know, who becomes the president on the Democratic side. Why are we starting in Iowa?
Is that a faux issue, or you think a real issue?
Well, I think it's a real issue. I think it's a tremendous issue. Think about the candidates. When we look at the diverse candidates that we had in, you know, 2019, from Senator Kamala Harris to Senator Cory Booker, those candidates had to go in and compete in Iowa, a state that you just gave us those statistics on. So when you think about the big tent party and how diverse the, you know, Democratic Party is, I think we should think about starting our election in a state that's more reflective of our party.
That's rich. That's rich. I agree with that. I agree with that. So tonight we will be giving the audience insight into what's going on the caucus and how certain candidates are doing. But before we, you know, drill down, because one of the things I'm hoping we'll do is have a rich discussion about each of the candidates, right? Each of the major candidates, the top four. But give us, if you will, an understanding of how the caucuses work, because they're not like primaries.
They're kind of strange. Well, first, they're very complex. And when you think about voting, you know, we go into these little, very, you know, enclosed little, you know, kiosks, as they are, and we cast on, you know, a very confidential, private vote. That's how voting happens in most states in the country, except these caucus states. They go into big gymnasiums or community centers, and literally there's a sign with your candidate. So if you're for, hypothetically, you know, Bernie Sanders or Joe Biden, all the people voting for that candidate or who prefer that candidate go stand under that sign. And, you know, they do a tally, and you have to get 15% in that first tally. And if you don't get 15% of all the folks who are there that night, you have to leave. And then that gives you, say you're for Amy Klobuchar, you get to come over to me and say, hey, Areva, your candidate didn't make that 15%. You in trouble.
Come on over
to my side. So there's a lot of horse trading that goes on. And you can imagine in some of these spaces, they're huge. They're like 1,000 people. And they're not all nice and civil and polite. And they don't always ask very nicely, come on over to my side. There's a lot of shouting and screaming and, you know, a lot of emotions. Coercion and name calling and sometimes even fisticuffs. But they're not as civil, I think. And they have some disadvantages. think about if you are the working mother, right? You have 2 kids you have to pick up. You've got to go home, get dinner on the table. You've got to do some homework, get those kids to bed. Are you really going to go and stand in a gymnasium and have a fight with your neighbors about, which candidate you prefer versus, the standard way of voting where you just go into a voting booth, check a box, and you're out? So I worry about, the disadvantage that it puts for particularly working people, working mothers, single mothers, people with disabilities. And I've seen some studies that say these caucuses really favor young people. Because a lot of older people are like, look, I got to go.
You can't stand that long. You can't stay that long. And one of the things that I hope that the viewers understand is that, as you just described it, so if you don't get 15%, your voters are released to join with other people.
Yes.
And so what can happen is, just because you moved on because you got 15% doesn't mean you'll survive the next room, because groups will combine with each other and overtake you. It's a very complicated process.
Very complicated, and this year they've even made some changes. So in the past, we only got a readout on the final determination, the delegate assignment, because all this is marching you towards the assignment of these 41 delegates for the state of Iowa. But after the 2016 election and some complaints from the Bernie Sanders team, in particular about lack of transparency, they are now reporting out. Some of the big news sites will report out the first, level alignment, so the first preferences, as you will, and then the second, and then the final. So you're going to see where people were when they first walked into that room. Did they all go to corner A? Did they go to corner B? Which candidate had the momentum at the beginning, and then you'll see what happened between, your first preference and your second preference.
There's one more issue in Iowa that I wanted to talk to you about, is that thousands of Black Iowan residents have served time in prison. And because they have lost the ability, or their ability to vote has been restricted. Yeah,
and that's a big issue. And basically they say for all times. And Cory Booker, Senator Cory Booker, who was doing, I thought would do very well in Iowa, because you talk about retail politics. He's so charismatic. He walks into a room, he has this big personality, he's so personal. But he talked a lot about, criminal justice and criminal justice reform, and making sure that, those voters, like this in the state of Iowa, and, we should note that even though Iowa has such a small population of African Americans, there's like 26% of all African American, or 26% of the Black men are incarcerated in that state. So small population, but high jail population. So Cory talked a lot, Senator Booker, I know him, so I should be respectful and call him Senator Booker, talked a lot about those voters who have been disenfranchised, and how we, the Democratic Party, this nation really needs to address that. And rather than suppressing the vote, what we need to do to make sure that everyone has an opportunity to vote. And Senator Harris, the senator from the state of California, who was gangbusting, came out with the largest, opening campaign, crowds of like 20,000 people in Oakland, who was, thought to be one of the rising stars in the party before she dropped out of the election, talked a lot about criminal justice reform.
It's interesting that you bring both of them up, because before we get into the candidates who are caucusing or being caucused tonight, let's talk a little bit about Cory Booker and Kamala, because they're not in the race anymore.
Or is Julian Castro.
Yeah, what happened?
Yeah, we started out looking like, the Rainbow Party. We had blacks, we had, Hispanic candidates. We still have Andrew Yang, so we still have an Asian candidate in the race. But I was personally really, really disappointed when Senator Harris and Senator Booker and, Castro had to drop out of the race, and a lot of it had to do with money, which is a big issue right now, because remember, it was Cory Booker who was fighting to change the rules about who could be on that debate stage, and now we're hearing that Bloomberg, they're changing the rules so you don't have to have that grassroots fundraising, which was such a big issue, because you had to have so many donors, so you had the grassroots donors, and then you had to have certain polls. So you had to register a certain number in national polls, and that became very difficult for the minority candidates. Both Senator Harris, when she dropped out, she says, "Look, I don't have the money. I don't see a pathway forward because I don't have the kind of fundraising dollars that I need. This is, estimates of about $100 million to really even be competitive. And you have somebody like Bloomberg, he stepped into the race, and $100 million is like a dime to this. This guy is like, he's just balling. He's just, going into states.
He spends that on lunch.
So it's interesting to see. And I was watching something earlier, and I'd love your opinion about this, Sean. One of the African American advisors to Senator Sanders talked about that, Bloomberg. And his ability to step into the race. And she was very critical of that. What do you think about the billionaire effect that we're seeing, not just with Bloomberg, but with Tom Steyer as well?
I don't know. Because I think at a certain level, if you can self-fund your campaign, you should be allowed to do that. Okay. I don't think that it is inherently immoral to be wealthy.
So you don't have any problems with billionaires? And my daughter asked me this question. She's like, Mom, because Democrats, we're always like banging on the billionaires, right? Hate the billionaires, get rid of the billionaires, the billionaires, the billionaires. And so we got 2 billionaires in the race, but they're not your typical billionaires. These are guys that have given a lot to progressive causes. So, but you're okay with them just coming in and big-footing everyone with their checkbook?
I'm suspicious of everybody.
Okay. Start there.
I'm suspicious of the billionaires, the grassroots people. I'm suspicious of the billionaires. I'm suspicious of Bernie.
Okay.
I got serious questions about him. Biden,
what are your
everybody.
issues? What are your Bernie issues? Your billionaire issues, I hear. You like money. That's good. Okay. So no problem with the billionaires. What are your Bernie issues?
I think Senator Sanders is an absolutist. And I think that that's dangerous. Yeah. I think that the inability, he's right on the issues, but the inability to be flexible on how you get it done is as problematic as conservatism tends to be. So it's just not a.
So I've been trying to have this vision, wrapping my head around seeing him on a big stage with Barack and Michelle.
Who, Bernie?
If he's the Democratic nominee coming out of the convention in July, all the Dems got to rally, right?
Yeah,
if we're going to win, we're going to see Bill on the campaign trail. We're going to see Hillary, who just said he's the most despised person on the planet.
You're not going to see Hillary.
Well, she's going to be someplace. She's probably not going to be standing next to
Bill, but I don't think you see Hillary.
But I'm wondering those dynamics, though, because of what you say about Senator Sanders. He has made a lot of enemies with established Democratic, a lot of folks in the establishment, what I guess we call moderates now, amongst the moderates. He hasn't made a lot of friends. But, the beauty of politics is, they're your enemy until they're not, right?